Hello, everybody. So continuing our discussion about concision, clarity, and fluency, this video is going to be about fluency. So fluency basically refers to making your writing easier for people to understand because you provide clear connections, variety, and emphasis to your sentences. So whereas some of the other things that we've chosen have related a lot to word choice and things like that, this is similar. But it also has to do with the organization of sentences, which makes it a little bit different than what we've discussed previously with concision and with clarity. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that you can see it, and then we will start our discussion. If I can find it, but it's hidden. Let me see. There we go. Okay, so let me share this and then make my slideshow start. Okay, so editing for fluency, kind of as I mentioned before, makes your sentences easier to read because the connections are clear, it adds variety, and it also adds emphasis to your sentences. So we'll describe now what that looks like whenever you start your actual editing process. So one of the things to keep in mind is you can combine related ideas. So instead of forcing readers to insert transitions between ideas, and making them decide which points are more important, you spell that out for them. So if you've got 3 sentences that are all kind of short and choppy, if you put them all together into one sentence, then that's going to help your reader understand a bit more of what you're trying to say. The second thing is varying sentence and construction, or sentence construction and length. We sometimes get wrapped up in very long sentences because we decide all of these ideas are related to one another, so we're just going to keep it going and going and going. And the challenge with that is people get to the end of the sentence and then have to go back and read the whole thing again because they got caught up in the middle with all of these words and the length of the sentence, they kind of lose its meaning. And then lastly, use short sentences for special emphasis. And you can do this sparingly to be effective. If you have lots of short, choppy sentences where you say, the dog is small, the dog is brown, the dog lives in a house, that gets to be very redundant, which we talked about in our concision discussion. However, if you're really trying to make an emphasis on something and you tell someone this is important and you make that its own sentence, then people are going to identify that, okay, well, this is different. The other sentences have been longer and included a lot more information. And so this short sentence then kind of takes people out of that, what they're experiencing normally throughout the rest of the document, and it brings it into very sharp focus because it's a much smaller sentence. So it's kind of different from what you have previously done. So it draws attention to it. Sorry, my dog is wandering around and also sneezing. Okay, so combining related ideas keeps your readers from having to create their own transitions between ideas and also decide which points are the most important because you do it kind of on your, you do it for them. You do the thinking work for them to be very clear in what it is you're trying to say. So in this original statement, which is Roy James graduated from an excellent management school. He has no experience. He is highly recommended. Okay, so these are 3 separate bits of information. So Roy James graduated from an excellent management school. He has no experience and he's highly recommended, right? So you've got a couple of pieces of information there. One that's basically informational, though it says the school is excellent. The second piece says he has no experience, so that might be considered as a negative. And then the last one says he's highly recommended, right? So no experience, but highly recommended. So those are kind of contradictory because one is positive and then one is negative. Okay, so if you want to create a very negative emphasis for that sentence, then you could change it to say, although Roy James graduated from an excellent management school and is very highly recommended, he has no experience. So you're drawing emphasis there. You're combining these ideas together and you're creating your own emphasis. This could be like, you may take this information and it needs to be construed as a negative emphasis, right? You can also put this together and make it a neutral emphasis, but here we're kind of highlighting, making it a negative and then a positive emphasis. So because you're saying up front, like you use the word although, and then you narrow that down. Hold on one second. Sorry about that. So because you've used the word although, and you put the 2 positives up front, because you've done those two things and then ended with he has no experience, you're putting the emphasis on he has no experience. So you are making those connections for the person who's reading. Whereas if you're going to establish a positive emphasis, you would say something like, although Roy James has no experience, comma, he graduated from an excellent management school and is highly recommended. So you have your original statements that are all kind of, you know, different. Some are positive, some are negative. And by just phrasing it in different ways, you can make a very strong negative emphasis, or you can make a positive emphasis. If you wanted to make it neutral, you could say something like, Roy James graduated from an excellent management school and has no experience, semicolon, he comes highly recommended. And then it's a little bit more neutral if you wanted to express it neutrally. So the second thing, vary sentence construction and length. And really what you want to do is to not rely on long and complex sentences. So you have your original statement, which is a disconnected idea, which is the nuclear core reached critical temperature, the loss of coolant alarm was triggered, the operator shut down the reactor. So these are potentially disconnected ideas, and whenever you connect them together, you would have something like, as the nuclear core reached critical temperature, triggering the loss of coolant alarm, the operator shut down. So then you combine those ideas, and so it makes them all connected, and you identify why all of these things are related to one another. Then the second is, let's go back for a second. So with the disconnected ideas, you have those three very short sentences, right? So they're all kind of choppy, but once you combine them together, you can tell your reader why all of this matters. All right, then there's also boring and repetitive. So the example sentence there is, there are a number of drawbacks about diesel engines. They're noisy, they're difficult to start in cold weather, they cause vibration, they also give off an unpleasant odor, they cause sulfur dioxide poisoning. So it's boring, repetitive, people are not going to want to read through that, where you can make the sentence more varied and say, diesel engines have a number of drawbacks, including noisiness, cold weather starting difficulties, vibrations, and odor. Most seriously, they cause sulfur dioxide pollution. So there you've connected all of the ideas, but it's also varied it. So it's not boring and repetitive, and it connects the ideas, but it makes it more varied, which makes it interesting for the reader. So short sentences can be used for special emphasis. And as I mentioned, you should use them sparingly. So we go back to the previous slide where you say things like, there are a number of drawbacks about diesel engines. They are noisy. They are difficult to start in cold weather. They cause vibration. Whenever you start to pile on all of those statements and they're all very short, it loses its emphasis. So if you look at this sentence here, that is a very long sentence, right? So the ordering system requires an initial completion of Form DC-10, followed after this has been processed by Finance and Legal by an approval that allows for Form DC-12 to be completed after the affirmative response to DC-10 is received. So remember, use DC-10, wait for a response, and then use DC-12. So you have this beginning part of the sentence that is really challenging. It's a whole lot of process. It's quite confusing. But then you get to the end, and those short sentences summarize everything and make it much easier for the reader to understand the previous statement, which is a horrible statement, by the way. It was just an example that was made available. So by putting all this information at the end and saying, so remember, use DC-10, wait for a response, then use DC-12, that helps the reader really identify the information you're trying to share, and those short sentences are a lot more effective and draw emphasis to those things that you're trying to draw emphasis to. All right, so here's some examples. We start out with John is a loyal employee, John is a motivated employee, John is short-tempered with his colleagues. Right, so you've got three very boring, repetitive sentences that you could pretty easily change into one complete thought with something like, John is a local and motivated employee, comma, but John is short-tempered with his colleagues. Or you could draw a positive emphasis to that and say, although John is short-tempered with his colleagues, he is a loyal employee and he is loyal and motivated, right? So you can kind of switch that and draw a different emphasis. All right, in the next sentence, computers cannot think for the writer. Computers eliminate many mechanical writing tasks. They speed up the flow of information. So all of this seems kind of disconnected from one another. So you could say something like, though computers speed the flow of information, they cannot think for the, though computers speed the flow of information and eliminate many mechanical writing tasks, they cannot think for the writer. And so then you can combine all of those ideas together, and then you can follow up with that in a paragraph with additional information that's going to be useful for your readers. All right, another thing to consider is finding the exact words. Poor word choices produce inefficient and often unethical writing that resists interpretation and frustrates the audience. Because if you don't find the exact word to mean what you're trying to say, then it can get very challenging for your reader. And using precise language that conveys your exact meaning is going to be much better for your audience. For example, with all of the things going on with coronavirus, we are sending messages to our students who have been either applied or been admitted into the College of Engineering. So one of the challenges we've had is we want to let them know that UNT is going to offer classes in the fall. We don't know what that means, so they're either going to be online or they're going to be face-to-face. And so we wrote a draft of information that indicates to the students that our doors are open whether you want to attend class online or in person. So that was basically what the first draft said. And so that makes it seem as though students, no matter what happens in the fall, will be able to choose between online classes or face-to-face classes, which is not true. They will only be able to make that decision or they won't be able to make that decision. They'll either have to choose one or the other based on our campus being open or based on limitations for like visas, for instance, or travel restrictions and things like that. So if in that situation, if we don't choose the exact right words, then we're going to share information with students that they're going to get very confused about. And so they may come, may come August 1st and they think they can take online classes when really we require them to be in person. So finding the exact right words is really important. So step one in this, prefer simple and familiar wording. Don't replace technically precise words with non-technical words that are vague or imprecise. So with this, you want to make sure that people understand exactly what it is that you're trying to say by using terms that they're going to understand, that describe what it is that you want them to know. So if there's a specific name for something, use that name. And then the second thing is avoiding triteness. So you like with worn out phrases like wander under the bridge, last but not least, and not by a long shot. Those are phrases that aren't useful to anyone really, but also you rely on them as colloquialisms from being wherever it is that you're from, or being from America, for instance, in my case, people would say, water under the bridge and understand kind of what that means. But if you take somebody who's from a different part of the country or somebody who's from another place, they may not understand exactly what it is that you're trying to share. And they're wondering why in a technical document you're using a term about water under a bridge when none of the things you're discussing have to do with water or bridges, right? So those are a couple of things to keep in mind whenever you're looking to find the exact words. So triteness are known as cliches or worn out phrases, and they make writers seem lazy and like they didn't want to put in enough effort to find the right word that they wanted to use. So there's some examples listed there of some trite terms that people might rely on. If you're writing a brief email to a friend and you include this, that's probably fine. If you're writing a technical document, again, just avoid doing this because it's not useful. So here's some examples of trite phrases. So last but not least could be lastly. Welcome aboard could just be welcome. On speaking terms could be friendly. In this day and age could be today. And at the crack of dawn is early in the morning, right? So we're taking these phrases that are just kind of, loose and not that specific, and we're instead choosing usually a shorter but definitely a more clear phrase to describe what we actually mean versus kind of beating around the bush, which would be a trite statement. So for example, we have to swallow our pride and admit our mistake. So in this, swallow our pride would be a trite statement. So instead, you could just leave that out and say, we'll have to admit our mistake. And in the second one, managers who make the grade are those who can take daily pressures with stride. So you've got make the grade and daily pressures with stride that could be considered trite terms. So instead, you might change it to something like good managers manage daily pressures, right? Or good managers can tolerate daily pressures or something along those lines, right? Because you don't need the make the grade part. Really, you're talking about them being good. So you can just use that term. And then with stride just means that they're able to do it easily, right? So it could be good managers manage daily pressures well, something like that. All right, so that was a little bit of information about fluency. Whenever you're going through and writing your documents, you might just look for some of these things, and it's going to help make your writing better. Again, if you have any questions about any of this, feel free to email me or connect with me somehow, and I'm happy to help you. I hope that your week goes well, and thanks for checking in. Bye.